They say you can tell everything you need to know about a person by how they behave when they think they've already won. That's what my daughter-in-law believed that night. Thanksgiving, my dining room, my table, my turkey. She stood there smiling, glass raised, basking in applause meant for her, while my life, at least the life I'd built over 4 decades, was being quietly stripped away in front of me. Now I'm officially handling everything, she announced, voice bright and confident. For his own protection, we've frozen his accounts. It's safer this way. People clapped. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Actually clapped. I didn't. I sat perfectly still, hands folded on my lap, watching a room full of people celebrate what they believed was the gentle retirement of a confused old man. I leaned slightly toward my son, lowered my voice so only he could hear me, and asked one simple question. Son, are you really blind to what's happening here? The color drained from his face. His hand shook so badly his fork clattered against his plate. That was when I knew, before she snapped her head toward us and demanded, blind to what? I already understood the truth. They thought they had me cornered. What they didn't realize was that I had spent most of my adult life hunting people exactly like her. My name is Walter Grayson. I'm 71 years old, and I live in a brick house outside Knoxville, Tennessee, the same house I paid off nearly 3 decades ago with money I earned honestly, line by line, audit by audit. I spent 37 years as a federal financial examiner. Not the glamorous kind you see on television, but the kind who sits quietly across a desk while someone sweats, lies, and slowly realizes the numbers won't save them. I retired thinking I'd earned peace. Instead, the most sophisticated fraud of my career walked into my home wearing a wedding ring and calling me dad. My son, Ethan, wasn't always the man who stared at his plate instead of my eyes. I remember teaching him to ride a bike on our old driveway, my hand gripping the seat as he pedaled furiously. Don't let go, he'd yelled. I didn't, not until he found his balance. Somewhere along the way, though, he lost it again. Ethan is 45 now, operations supervisor at a regional shipping firm. Solid income, nothing extravagant, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to explain the changes that began after he married Marissa. Marissa Hale, now Marissa Grayson. She's 41, polished, articulate, with a smile that makes people feel chosen. When Ethan first brought her home, she clasped my hands and said, "Your son speaks so highly of you. I feel lucky to be joining this family." She didn't blink once. I noticed that. People think liars avoid eye contact. That's not true. The best ones hold it too long. They married a year later. When my wife passed shortly after, heart failure, sudden and merciless, the house felt cavernous. Too quiet. When Ethan suggested they move in for a while, I agreed. I thought companionship might help. It did, just not the way I expected. At first, Marissa's help came wrapped in concern. Dad, you shouldn't worry about bills anymore. Let us handle utilities. Then paperwork. Then banking. Then one afternoon, she laughed lightly and said, honestly, it's easier if everything's consolidated. At your age, details can be exhausting. At my age, I was still consulting part-time for a regional compliance firm, still sharper than most men half my age. But I said nothing, because predators don't pounce immediately. They soften the ground first. Small things changed. Mail opened before I saw it. Conversations paused when I entered the room. Documents disappeared from counters. She called herself a financial strategist. No license, no public history, no traceable credentials. Her older brother visited often, always steering conversations toward my memory, my sleep, my medications. I noticed everything. I wrote nothing down. Old habits die hard. Then Thanksgiving came. She seated herself at the head of the table. My seat. Wine flowed. Laughter rose. My son drank too quickly. And then she stood and declared control. Declared my accounts frozen. Declared my life managed. And they applauded. Here's the thing about people like Marissa. They believe humiliation is the end game. They don't understand it's often the beginning. I smiled that night, nodded, played exactly the role she needed me to play. The confused patriarch finally stepping aside. But as I looked around my dining room, my father's table, My wife's china, my son avoiding my gaze. Something settled inside me. Not anger. Recognition. She wasn't just stealing money. She was building a case. And she had no idea what kind of man she'd chosen as her victim. Now, let me tell you what she didn't know when she raised that glass. I didn't confront her that night. That's the mistake people make when they realize they've been betrayed. They react. They demand explanations. They give away leverage before they even know what they're holding. I went to bed instead, lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow, counting rotations the way I used to count discrepancies in ledgers. 3 years. That's how long they'd been living under my roof. 3 years of help. 3 years of simplifying. 3 years of documents I'd signed too casually or hadn't signed at all. I wasn't angry yet. Anger clouds judgment. This was something colder. The next morning, the house moved quietly. Ethan left early. Too early. Didn't even touch his coffee. Marissa stayed upstairs in what used to be my bedroom, the one my wife and I shared for 35 years, now converted into her private office. I made myself breakfast like any other day. Toast. Black coffee. Routine matters when you're about to dismantle someone's assumptions. Then I went downstairs. Old houses hide secrets. Mine had one very well. Behind a false panel in the basement workshop, concealed by the workbench where I restore antique radios, sits a safe I installed more than 20 years ago. I never told Ethan about it. Never told my wife either. Some habits from federal service don't fade. You learn early that redundancy is survival. Inside were copies of every important document I'd ever signed. Deeds, statements, tax filings, signature samples spanning decades. I pulled out my phone and compared them to a photograph I'd quietly taken the night before. The document Marissa left out, just long enough for me to see, had looked official. Power of attorney. My name. My address. My signature. Except it wasn't mine. The forgery was competent. Better than most I'd seen. But whoever signed it didn't know me well enough. My capital G has a backward lean. Always has. A quirk from my 20s that never disappeared. On that paper, the G stood perfectly straight. Too perfect. That's how you know. I photographed everything. Uploaded copies to a secure cloud account she didn't know existed. Then I returned the documents to the safe and closed the panel. Exactly as before. Around noon, Marissa appeared in the kitchen, cheerful as sunrise. "How are you feeling today, Dad?" she asked. "Sleep okay?" "Just fine," I said. She studied me longer than usual, eyes scanning for cracks. "You know what I said last night?" she continued gently. "About finances. It's really for the best. We just want you stress-free." I smiled at her. The same smile I'd given executives who'd embezzled 7 figures and thought charm would save them. "That's very considerate of you," I said. "Family looks out for each other." She relaxed slightly. Predators hate uncertainty. Reassurance buys time. That afternoon, I searched quietly. Not on my home computer. At the public library. Elder financial exploitation laws. Tennessee statutes. Forgery penalties. Fiduciary abuse. The results were enlightening. Financial exploitation of an elderly adult was a felony. Forgery carried prison time. And if she'd used that document to access accounts, that escalated matters significantly. I found an attorney specializing in elder abuse and scheduled a consultation using a credit card she didn't know existed. Then I waited. That evening, I heard her brother on the phone. "Thin walls carry truth better than people think." "Honestly, it's getting worse," he said. He asked me twice what day it was. "Ethan's worried." "We all are." I stood very still in the hallway, listening. I hadn't forgotten the day. I'd asked because I wanted him gone. They weren't just stealing money. They were building a narrative. Confused old man. Declining memory. Needs supervision. Needs control. Needs someone else to decide for him. Later that night, I found another envelope in the trash. Bank correspondence. Opened. Addressed to me. That was the moment doubt vanished. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was orchestration. And orchestration requires response. I sat alone in my basement workshop, surrounded by ticking radios and half-restored dials. Patience. Precision. Every fraud looks complex until you isolate the broken gear. Marissa thought she'd found a helpless old man. What she'd actually done was wake the part of me that never retired. I didn't rush the meeting. People assume urgency is power. It isn't. Control is. I waited 5 days after Thanksgiving before seeing the attorney. Long enough for Marissa to relax again. Long enough for her to believe the performance had worked. On the morning of the appointment, I told her I was going to the library. She looked up from her phone, eyebrows lifting just slightly. "The library?" she asked. "What for?" "I've been thinking about writing," I said casually. "Memoirs. 37 years in federal finance. Plenty of stories." She smiled, but it was tight around the edges. "That sounds nice," she said. "Good for keeping your mind active." There was again that subtle framing. I finished my coffee, put on my coat, and walked out. 3 blocks later, I ordered a rideshare. The law office sat in a glass building downtown, neutral, anonymous, efficient. The attorney's name was Daniel Rojas. Mid-50s, sharp eyes, no wasted words. I handed him my phone without introduction and let him scroll through the photographs. The power of attorney, the signature comparisons, the account summaries. He didn't interrupt. When he finished, he looked at me differently. "You're certain you didn't sign this?" he said. "I examined forged documents for most of my adult life," I replied. "That signature isn't mine." He zoomed in again. "The slant on the capital letter," he said slowly. "It's wrong." "Yes." He set the phone down. "Mr. Grayson, if this document was used to access your accounts, we're talking about felony forgery and financial exploitation. Possibly more." "I suspected as much," I said. "Suspicion isn't enough." "No," he agreed. "Documentation is." I told him about the safe, the copies, the cloud backups. He nodded. "You've already done half my job." Before I left, he slid a card across the desk. "Private investigator," he said. "Former fraud unit. She's discreet. And thorough." "How thorough?" He smiled faintly. "She doesn't miss patterns." I paid him in cash. Money Marissa didn't know existed. That night, I heard Marissa pacing upstairs. Phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was sharp, clipped. "No, he didn't say anything. He's just different. Watching more." A pause. "Yes, I'm handling it." I slept better than I had in months. The investigator's name was Lena Caldwell. Early 30s. Observant. Quiet. We met in a diner across town. "I want everything," I told her. "Professional history. Clients. Complaints. Lawsuits. Anyone she's worked with." She didn't write anything down. Just nodded. "In my experience," she said, "people who steal from family rarely start with family. That's what I'm counting on." Meanwhile, I play my role. Confused. Compliant. Grateful. Every morning, Marissa checked on me. Every evening, I retreated early. She believed fatigue was winning. What she didn't realize was that fatigue was camouflage. 2 weeks later, Lena emailed me the first report. Marissa had no professional licenses, no certifications, but she had a trail. 3 elderly clients over the past decade, all widowed, all financially comfortable, all with complaints that went nowhere. One name stood out, a man in his mid-70s. Passed away less than a year after she took over his finances. Estate nearly depleted. Cause of death listed as natural. I stared at the screen for a long time. She wasn't improvising. She was repeating. That night, Marissa brought up estate planning. Casually. "Have you ever thought about making things easier for Ethan?" she asked. I smiled. Every day. She thought she meant control. I meant consequences. Predators hate loose ends. They can tolerate risk. They can tolerate lies. What they cannot tolerate is something valuable existing beyond their reach. That's what I gave her. 2 weeks after Lena's first report, I opened a new bank account. Not at the institution Marissa had streamlined everything into. A different one. Smaller branch. Stricter verification. I deposited a modest amount by most standards, but more than enough to tempt someone like her. A little over $74,000. Pulled from cash I'd kept hidden for emergencies that I'd hoped would never come. Then I did something careless. At least, careless by appearances. I left the account statement on the kitchen counter while I stepped into the garage. Just long enough. I watched from the doorway as Marissa entered the room. Her eyes dropped to the paper, widened, then narrowed. She said nothing, didn't touch it. just walked past as if she hadn't seen a thing. But her grip tightened on the laundry basket until her knuckles went pale. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. The hook was set. For the next week, I did nothing. No questions, no reactions. Routine is disarming. On the 8th day, I received a letter. Attempted unauthorized access. Representative documentation rejected. Incident logged. I read it 3 times. Then I sat back and smiled. She couldn't help herself. I drove straight to Daniel Rojas's office. He read the letter once, then again. This, he said, tapping the page, is attempted bank fraud. Yes. And identity theft. Yes. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. She escalated. She always would, I replied. That evening, Ethan asked to meet me. Coffee shop. Neutral ground. He looked terrible. Hands shaking. Eyes sunken. I knew something was wrong, he admitted. I just didn't want to see it. I told him about the letter. His face went white. She's planning something, he whispered. For your birthday. A trust. If you're declared incompetent. I nodded. I know. That night, I slept peacefully because predators panic when control slips. And panic makes mistakes. When control starts slipping, predators don't retreat. They escalate. They look for authority figures to do what fear can no longer accomplish. That's exactly what Marissa did. 2 mornings after the bank letter arrived, the doorbell rang just after 10. I opened it to find a woman in professional attire, clipboard tucked neatly under her arm. Mr. Grayson? She asked gently. I'm Elaine Porter with Adult Protective Services. We've received concerns about your well-being. Marissa appeared behind me instantly. Almost too instantly. Oh, thank goodness you're here, she said, hand pressed her chest. We've been so worried. Concern, I'd learned, was her favorite costume. Elaine sat me down in my own living room. Asked about dates, names, medication, finos, routine. Marissa hovered nearby, correcting nothing, watching everything. I answered calmly, accurately. When asked about my career, I detailed 37 years in federal financial oversight, fraud detection, and compliance audits. Elaine's pen paused. She glanced at Marissa, then back at me. After nearly an hour, she closed her folder. Mr. Grayson, she said carefully, based on today's assessment, I find no indication of cognitive impairment. You appear fully capable of managing your own affairs. Marissa's smile didn't fade, but something behind it cracked. That afternoon, Marissa locked herself in the bedroom. I heard pacing, phone calls, the sound of recalculation. 3 days later, Daniel called. She's filed a motion to declare you incompetent, he said, using statements from her brother. Of course she has. We're ready. The evaluation was thorough. Doctors, psychologists, memory tests, logic puzzles. 2 days. The report was unequivocal. Fully competent. The judge dismissed the motion in under 20 minutes. Marissa didn't look at me once. The next move came from a reporter. She tried to control the story. Instead, she handed me a microphone. And that was her final mistake. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm looking for Walter Grayson, a man said when I answered. My name is Michael Reeves. I'm a reporter with the Knoxville Sentinel. I knew immediately why he was calling. Your daughter-in-law reached out to us, he continued. She claims you've been harassing her, creating an unsafe environment, and exhibiting paranoid behavior. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was predictable. She didn't mention the lawsuit, I said. Silence. What lawsuit, he asked. I told him everything. The forged documents, the frozen accounts, the attempted bank access, the failed incompetency claim, the private investigator, the pattern. By the time I finished, the line was quiet. Would you be willing to go on record? He finally asked. I've been waiting for someone to ask. The story didn't run immediately. Good journalists verify. 2 weeks later, Michael called back. I found 2 more people, he said. Both elderly, both former clients. Both lost significant sums. One had lost nearly $92,000. The other more than $110,000. Both had been told it was normal. Both had been too embarrassed to speak. Until now, Daniel called the district attorney the same day. This was no longer civil. This was criminal. Marissa didn't know yet. She still smiled at breakfast. still played concerned caretaker, still believed she could outrun the truth. She couldn't, because patterns don't lie. The arrests happened on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday, not rain-soaked or thunderous or heavy with omen. An ordinary Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that arrives without ceremony, without warning, and without mercy for the idea that terrible things ought to announce themselves. The kind that opens quietly like any other day and then keeps going long after someone's life has been split cleanly down the middle. The sky was clear too clear, pale blue, stretched thin and uninterrupted from one edge of the horizon to the other. No clouds to read meaning into. No darkness to blame. Just openness. Just light. Birds argued loudly in the trees. Not singing arguing. Sharp calls, quick dives, wings flicking through branches as if the world were exactly as it should be. They didn't pause. They didn't soften their noise. They didn't take notice. That was the part that stayed with me most. The world does not stop when control collapses. It does not slow out of respect. It does not lower its voice. It does not wait for grief or fear or justice to catch up. It keeps going. I wasn't home when they came for Marissa. That fact mattered to her far more than it ever did to me. Later, much later, I would learn how central my absence became to her version of events. How she replayed the moment obsessively, reconstructing it again and again in her mind, searching for a version where she retained the upper hand. In every retelling, I was supposed to be there, watching, witnessing, orchestrating. In her narrative, absence could not be neutral. It had to mean something. The house was quiet when the officers arrived. Too quiet. No argument already in progress. No familiar resistance. No enemy in the room to accuse of setting the stage. No one to blame immediately except the situation itself, and that was unacceptable. So she filled the gap. In her version, my absence was intentional, strategic, a final act of cruelty layered on top of years of perceived betrayal. Proof that everything had been planned. Proof that she had been surrounded by enemies all along. But the truth was simpler. I was at the grocery store, not fleeing, not hiding, not staging anything, just standing under fluorescent lights, pushing a cart with a squeaky wheel, deciding whether avocados were worth the risk that week. I remember the produce aisle vividly, the way mundane moments sharpen themselves in retrospect. The misting system hissed softly overhead, sending a cool spray across piles of leafy greens. The air smelled faintly of citrus and damp cardboard. Somewhere nearby, someone dropped an apple. It rolled. No one rushed to pick it up. I stood there longer than necessary, weighing one avocado in my hand, then another. Too firm, too soft, too expensive for something that might be useless by morning. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Nothing urgent. I remember thinking absurdly, irrationally that things had been quiet lately. That silence had settled into the days in a way that felt unnatural, like the pause before something inevitable. I put the avocados back. Daniel called me an hour later. His voice didn't bother with preamble. They picked her up at the house, he said. I stopped walking. The cart rolled forward an inch and bumped lightly into my heel. The contact was small, almost polite, but it grounded me in a way nothing else could have. I was still in a grocery store. People were still shopping. A woman nearby compared prices on cereal. Someone laughed. What do you mean, picked her up? I asked, though the answer had already formed in the space behind my ribs. Arrested, he said. 2 officers. Mid-afternoon. The words didn't arrive all at once. They came slowly, gently, like snowflakes you don't notice until the ground is already white and the landscape has changed without your permission. I leaned against the cart handle and closed my eyes briefly, not in relief, not in triumph, but in something closer to recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that something long in motion had finally reached its conclusion. According to the report which I read later, line by line, with a steadiness that surprised even me, Marissa thought it was a delivery. That detail lodged itself somewhere deep and refused to move. She had been expecting something. Not just a package, but an arrival, a confirmation, a document, a transaction clearing, something she believed she had earned or engineered into existence. Her life had conditioned her to expect returns on manipulation. The doorbell, to her, was rarely a threat. It was an offering. When it rang, she didn't tense. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even check the camera. Yoga clothes, phone in hand, a smile already forming. That smile mattered more than almost anything else in the report. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't joy. It was anticipation. The practiced expression of someone who believed the world was about to give her something else she deserved. The kind of smile that comes from entitlement, not happiness. The kind that assumes compliance before it's earned. She opened the door without suspicion. Two uniformed officers stood on the porch. One male, one female. Neutral expressions. No urgency. No aggression. Clipboards visible. Hands relaxed. Their posture communicated nothing dramatic, just procedure. Just inevitability. For a brief moment, she assumed mistake. Wrong house. Wrong person. She laughed lightly, according to the report. Asked if she could help them. Tilted her head, as if indulging in inconvenience rather than confronting a threat. They asked her to confirm her name. She did, still smiling. They informed her she was under arrest. She didn't believe them. Not at first. Disbelief came easily to her. It had always been her first line of defense. Reality, in her experience, was negotiable. Facts bent. Consequences were theoretical. Authority could be redirected or undermined. She laughed again, louder this time, sharper. Said something about how ridiculous that was. Gestured vaguely toward the house behind her, toward the life she had constructed with such care. Toward the visible markers of success she believed functioned as insulation. People like her weren't arrested on Tuesdays. People like her handled things privately. Through attorneys. Through influence. Through money. But when the female officer reached for the cuffs, Marissa finally understood that this was not theater. The metal clicking shut was the sound of her reality snapping. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was final. Even with cold steel at her wrist, she demanded a supervisor. Threatened lawsuits. Promised consequences. She told them they were making a very big mistake. She told them they would lose their jobs. She told them she knew people. She told them this would ruin them. She said it with conviction, with practice, with the certainty of someone who had always been able to turn intimidation into leverage. None of it mattered. Her assets had already been frozen by court order. Her accounts locked. Her credit lines severed. Every channel she used to exert pressure had been closed quietly, efficiently, without spectacle. Her access was gone. For the first time in her adult life, she could not talk her way out of a moment. By the time they walked her down the porch steps, neighbors had begun to notice. Curtains shifted, doors cracked open, phones lifted not boldly, but discreetly. No one rushed forward. No one intervened. They watched the way people always do when someone else's life implodes close enough to feel dangerous. Marissa held her head high. She always did. Even when control slipped through her fingers, she performed confidence like armor. Chin up, shoulders back, expression composed. It was the posture of someone who still believed this was temporary, that this, too, could be reversed. Her brother was arrested that same evening. Different location, different officers, same calm efficiency, conspiracy, false reporting, accessory to exploitation. He went quietly. Shock does that to people. It drains the noise from them, turns protest into stillness, leaves them hollowed out, blinking, trying to understand how the world could have moved forward without their permission or awareness. He didn't ask for a lawyer right away, didn't argue, didn't threaten. He simply nodded when told to stand, when told to turn, when told to place his hands behind his back. Later, his attorney would say it was because he knew that some part of him had always known this day would come, that he had spent years waiting for it, even while helping delay it. That compliance was not innocence, but exhaustion. The bail hearing was the next morning. Early. Too early for drama. Too early for crowds. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant, the layered scent of history and sterilization. The air was cool, overconditioned, humming faintly with institutional indifference. Papers shuffled. Shoes squeaked softly against polished floors. A clerk coughed and apologized. I sat in the back row. Didn't want the spotlight. Didn't want to be mistaken for something I wasn't. Vengeful, triumphant, invested in spectacle. I wasn't there to watch her fall. I was there to make sure she didn't stand back up. Marissa entered in cuffs. The yoga clothes were gone, replaced with standard issue gray. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, as if control could still be exerted somewhere anywhere. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp. Searching, she scanned the room immediately. For allies, for threats, for leverage. She found none. The prosecutor didn't waste time. He laid out the charges methodically, without flourish or judgment. His voice was calm, almost bored, as if reading inventory rather than outlining the collapse of someone's carefully maintained life. That, more than anything, seemed to unsettle her. Financial exploitation of multiple elderly adults. Forgery, bank fraud, identity theft. Each charge landed with weight not because of how it was delivered, but because of how impossible it was to argue with. This was not conjecture. This was documentation. This was math. Total documented losses exceeding $300,000. Documented. That word mattered. Not alleged. Not suspected. Proven. Bail was set at $350,000. There was no dramatic gasp. No theatrical collapse. Just a subtle shift in Marissa's posture, as if something internal had finally given way. As if a calculation had run its course and failed. She didn't have it. Not liquid. Not accessible. Not anymore. For the first time, arithmetic betrayed her. Then she saw Ethan. My son stood near the aisle, hands clenched, jaw trembling. He hadn't planned to be visible, hadn't intended to draw her eye. But truth has a gravity of its own. It pulls focus whether you want it to or not. Their eyes met, and the mask finally shattered. For a fraction of a second, something naked crossed Marissa's face. Not fear, not yet. Not guilt. It was something closer to disbelief, the sharp internal fracture of a story breaking apart. Ethan was not supposed to be there like that. Not upright. Not steady. Not visible as anything other than an extension of her will. He was supposed to be silent. You did this, she screamed. The sound tore through the courtroom with no regard for decorum. It wasn't loud so much as raw, stripped of performance and polish. Heads turned. A murmur rippled. The bailiff straightened. The judge's pen paused mid-note. After everything I did for you. Her voice cracked not with grief, not with sorrow, but with rage sharpened by entitlement. This was the fury of someone whose investment had failed to yield obedience, of someone who believed care was a transaction and loyalty a debt. Guards moved quickly, gripping her arms, anchoring her to the present moment she kept trying to escape. You'll regret this, she spat, twisting against them. You hear me? You'll regret this. The threat was automatic, reflexive, the last card she knew how to play. Then she saw me, not gradually, not as part of the room. She saw me all at once. Her eyes burned not with surprise, but with recognition, with accusation, with the certainty that I had been there all along, watching from the margins, waiting for gravity to do what force never could. This isn't over, she hissed. The words were venomous, intimate, meant only for me. I met her gaze calmly. Years of manipulation, intimidation, and theatrical outrage had trained her to expect reaction: fear, anger, defensiveness. Something she could grab onto and twist. She got none. It is, I said. Not loudly. Not for the room. Just enough. The guards began to move her toward the side door. She resisted not violently, but insistently, as if refusing to accept that the room no longer belonged to her. Her heels dragged. Her head snapped back once more, searching for something, anything that might still respond. Nothing did. She was led away, still muttering, still bargaining with a reality that had already closed its doors. The courtroom exhaled. Not relief, not satisfaction, just continuation. The docket moved on. Another name was called. Another life stepped into the space she'd vacated. The system did what systems do. It absorbed the disruption and returned to rhythm. Ethan didn't move right away. He stood frozen near the aisle, breathing shallowly, as if unsure whether the ground beneath him would hold now that she was gone. I watched his shoulders rise and fall, the delayed tremor working its way through him. He didn't look at me. Not yet. He waited until the room thinned, until the sound softened, until the moment felt less exposed. Only then did he turn, eyes glassy, jaw tight, and give a small nod. Not gratitude, not relief, acknowledgement. That afternoon, he came to see me. He knocked before entering, like a guest in his own life. That detail undid me more than anything else that day. He didn't barge in the way he used to, didn't assume the space belonged to him by default. He waited, stood back, gave me the chance to say no. I stepped aside and let him in. He looked smaller, not physically diminished, but stripped. Lighter, too, like a man who had finally dropped a weight he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there and was now recalibrating his balance. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where arguments had once unfolded in fragments and half-truths. The same table where Marissa had played the role of concern and reason while quietly tightening her grip on every narrative, every decision, every fault line she could exploit. The table still bore faint marks from those years. A nick in the wood where a fork had been slammed down once. A darkened ring from a coffee mug left too long during a fight that never quite resolved. Ethan wrapped his hands around a mug he hadn't touched. I testified, he said. His voice was steady, almost too steady, but his hands betrayed him, knuckles pale, fingers rigid, as if anchoring himself to something solid. I told him everything. There was no drama in the statement, no pride, no apology, just fact. I nodded. No congratulations, no reassurance, just acknowledgement. He swallowed. I thought I'd feel something else, he said after a moment. Relief. Victory. I don't know. What do you feel? I asked. He considered the question carefully, as if wary of giving the wrong answer. Empty, he said finally, but not in a bad way. More like quiet. I understood that. Silence, after years of noise, can feel like loss before it feels like peace. He stared down at the table, tracing the grain with his thumb. She always said if I told anyone, everything would fall apart, he said. That people would get hurt. That would be my fault. I didn't interrupt. She was right, he added, about things falling apart. She just wasn't right about who caused it. That was the moment something in him settled. Not healed, not resolved, but oriented toward truth instead of fear. He stayed for a while longer, talking in pieces. Not a confession, not a catharsis. Just fragments, memories he hadn't known where to put before. Moments he'd dismissed as normal because questioning them had felt too dangerous. When he left, he hugged me briefly, awkwardly, like someone relearning the shape of affection. After that, things moved quickly and slowly at the same time. Court dates multiplied. Filings stacked up. Names emerged, elderly men and women whose finances had been siphoned quietly, methodically, under the guise of help. People who had trusted her because she'd sounded competent, caring, authoritative. Some cried during statements. Some were furious. Some were simply tired. Marissa's brother took a plea. Not immediately. He held out at first, clinging to the idea that loyalty might still mean something. But loyalty had already been spent, used up in transactions that benefited no one but her. Eventually, he chose himself. Marissa did not. In custody, her behavior became erratic. Not violent, she was too careful for that, but volatile. She filed complaints, accused guards of mistreatment, claimed medical emergencies that dissolved under examination. She wrote letters, not apologies, not explanations, demands. She blamed Ethan. She blamed me. She blamed the system. She blamed the victims for being confused and ungrateful. What she never blamed was herself. Control, when it collapses, doesn't disappear gracefully. It thrashes. The trial never became a spectacle. No cameras, no grandstanding, just evidence, documents, timelines, testimony that stacked too neatly to dismantle. Ethan testified again, this time without shaking. He spoke clearly, carefully. He did not embellish. He did not dramatize. He told the truth as he had lived it, which was devastating enough. Marissa stared at him the entire time, not pleading, not remorseful, calculating. Even then, the verdict was inevitable. The sentence was substantial. When it was read, she did not cry. She did not scream. She sat very still, as if waiting for someone to interrupt and correct the mistake. No one did. In the months that followed, the house was sold. Accounts unwound. The artifacts of her life furniture, clothing, objects she'd once imbued with power were reduced to inventory. Ethan began therapy. He learned new words, new boundaries, new ways of understanding how deeply control can entangle itself with love. I learned something too, that justice isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with thunder or vindication or the satisfaction of watching someone suffer. It arrives quietly, on an ordinary Tuesday, under a clear sky, while birds argue loudly in the trees. And it keeps going. That was the moment I knew the story would end cleanly. Not because justice is perfect, not because systems always work, but because the truth had finally been spoken by the person she had relied on most to keep it buried. And once control collapses from the inside, there is no rebuilding it, only reckoning. Trials don't feel like television. There's no music, no dramatic pauses, just fluorescent lights, stiff benches, and the quiet weight of truth waiting to be spoken aloud. Marissa's trial began in early summer. 3 weeks on the docket. Every seat filled by people who'd never known her charm, only the aftermath of it. I attended every day, not out of vengeance, out of obligation. When someone tries to erase you quietly, the least you can do is bear witness when the truth finally speaks. The prosecution built the case methodically. Bank records first, transfers, withdrawals, fees that never existed, expenses that were never incurred. Expert witnesses followed, forensic accountants who traced money across institutions, timelines that showed a repeating pattern, not mistakes. They explained how small amounts were taken first, then larger, then aggressively, always framed as help, always justified as protection. Then came the forged documents. An expert in handwriting analysis took the stand. He displayed enlarged images of my signature beside the one on the power of attorney, pointed out the slant, the pressure, the rhythm. These signatures were not produced by the same hand, he said. The differences are consistent with practiced forgery. Marissa stared straight ahead, didn't blink, didn't flinch. The victims testified next. That's when the room changed. An elderly woman in her late 70s took the stand first. She spoke softly, carefully, about church luncheons, about advice offered freely, about trust built slowly. She described checking her balance one morning and realizing more than $90,000 was gone. She cried, not loudly, just quietly. The jury leaned forward. The second victim was a man confined to a wheelchair. Stroke survivor, clear mind, steady voice. He described losing over $120,000, savings meant for his grandchildren. He didn't cry. He just looked at Marissa and said, "You told me I was safe." She didn't look back. Then Ethan took the stand. My son looked thinner than he had months earlier, but steadier. The prosecutor asked him about the power of attorney, about the transfers, about the plans. He answered every question, didn't dodge, didn't soften. I saw her practice my father's signature, he said, night after night. The defense objected, overruled. I knew it was wrong, he continued. I didn't stop it because I was afraid. When asked why he was testifying now, he looked directly at the jury. Because I'm done being a coward. I swallowed hard. The defense tried to reframe everything. Poor management, misunderstandings, confused elders. They suggested I was paranoid, that I'd imagined patterns where none existed, that my son was lying to save himself. It didn't land, because truth, when stacked carefully, doesn't wobble. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Marissa didn't react. Not at first. It wasn't until the word guilty repeated that her shoulders sagged, as if gravity finally remembered her. Sentencing followed weeks later. The judge read her decision slowly, carefully. This court finds a sustained pattern of predatory financial exploitation, she said, targeting vulnerable individuals under the guise of care. 6 years for exploitation, 3 years consecutive for forgery, 2 concurrent for bank fraud. Total sentence, 9 years. Restitution ordered, over $350,000. Marissa's head dropped. The woman who once stood at my table and declared control didn't look powerful anymore. She looked small. I didn't feel joy. I felt completion. Justice isn't loud. It's final. The courthouse emptied slowly after sentencing. People lingered in clusters, talking in hushed voices, as if raising the volume might somehow disturb what had just been decided. I stepped outside alone. The late afternoon air was warm, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. Cars passed. Someone laughed across the street. Life continued, indifferent, steady, unmoved by one woman's downfall. That's the strange thing about justice. It feels monumental when you're waiting for it, and surprisingly quiet when it finally arrives. Ethan found me on the courthouse steps. He looked older than his years now, but lighter too, like someone who'd finally stopped carrying a lie that had been crushing his spine. "It's over," he said. "Yes," I replied. "It is." He hesitated, then asked the question he'd been holding back for months. "What happens now?" I thought about that. About the house. About the rooms that still echoed with voices that no longer belonged there. "I'm selling the place," I said. His eyes widened. "Really? Too many memories. Too many shadows. I wanted walls that didn't remember her. I'm looking at condo downtown," I added. "Somewhere smaller. Cleaner. Mine." He nodded slowly. "I filed for divorce," he said. "Papers went through last week." I already knew, but hearing it still mattered. "That's a start," I said. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. Some conversations only work when silence carries its share. I moved 3 months later. The condo overlooked the river, sunlight spilling across hardwood floors that had never heard shouting, plotting, or whispered phone calls. I donated most of the old furniture, kept a few things. My wife's cookbook, a framed photograph of Ethan as a boy, standing next to his first bike. Some things deserve to survive. Ethan came by occasionally, not often, but regularly. He was learning who he was without someone else telling him. That takes time. Trust takes longer. Thanksgiving came again. 1 year after the night, everything changed. Ethan asked if he could come over. "Just us," he said. "No guests. No speeches." I smiled. "I'll make the turkey," I said. "You bring dessert." When he arrived, carrying a pie and a bottle of wine, he looked nervous, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. We cooked together, quietly, the way we used to, before control and fear had taken over. When we sat down at the table, small, simple, honest, I poured 2 glasses. "A year ago," I said, "someone stood at my table and announced they'd taken control of my life." He nodded. "A lot's changed." I raised my glass. "To justice," I said, "and to second chances." He met my eyes. "To earning them." We drank. Outside, the city lights flickered on, one by one. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. People ask me sometimes if I feel satisfied. If watching her led away in handcuffs brought me peace. If knowing she'll spend years behind concrete walls made it all worth it. The truth is more complicated than that. Justice doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like balance being restored after something was quietly tilted for too long. What Marissa tried to take from me wasn't just money. It was agency, identity, the right to decide when I was done living. That's what predators like her misunderstand. They think age is weakness. They think silence is surrender. They mistake patience for confusion. What they never account for is experience. Experience teaches you when to speak and when to wait. I still wake up early. Still drink my coffee black. Still read the paper cover to cover. Some habits don't change just because the chapter does. But now, when I sit by the window of my condo and watch the river move steadily past, I feel something I hadn't felt in years. Uncontested peace. No calculations. No listening through walls. No one watching my hands, my mail, my face. Just time honestly earned. Ethan and I are still rebuilding. That kind of damage doesn't vanish with a verdict. But we talk. We show up. We're learning how to exist without fear guiding every decision. He's found a smaller apartment not far from mine. Started therapy. Stopped drinking the way he used to. I don't excuse what he allowed. I never will. But I recognize effort when I see it. And effort matters. Sometimes late at night, I think about the others. The people who came forward because someone finally believed them. The woman who cried on the witness stand because she thought she'd been foolish. The man who lost money meant for grandchildren who hadn't even been born yet. If there's any comfort in what happened, it's knowing she won't do it again. Not to them, not to anyone. Aging teaches you something younger people don't yet understand. Your world gets quieter, smaller, and that makes betrayal louder when it comes from inside your own home. If you're listening to this and something feels wrong in your life, a helpful hand that tightens too much, decisions being made without your voice, pay attention. You don't lose your rights with your youth. You don't forfeit dignity because your hair turns gray. And you're never obligated to hand over control just because someone insists it's for your own good. I didn't win because I was stronger. I won because I was patient. Because I remembered who I was before anyone tried to redefine me. And because I trusted truth to do what it always does when given time. Surface. Thanksgiving will come again. It always does. This year, it'll be quiet. Just a meal. A table. No speeches. No announcements. No applause. And that's exactly how I want it. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. Stories like this don't end loudly. They end honestly. And honesty, I've learned, is the one thing no predator can survive.